Yo, what's up guys? So today we are gonna see, what if Neglected Naruto becomes the Demon Lord Diablo, and got harem, part 1. Hope you'll enjoy this video. So before we start, go check out the author of this fanfic, Decoholo117, link is in the description, and also subscribe to my channel, and like this video. Let's begin the video. The cries of woe and agony erupted forth, deep within the dark confines of what were once the proud and illustrious halls of the high heavens. Where once there was light, there was only darkness, even as the fires of the burning hell swept through the broken remnants of the diamond gates, who until this day, had never once been breached. The heavenly host, the armies of the high heavens, fought against the coming onslaught of the infernal legions, which ruled over the burning hells. A pointless effort in the end, their battles meaningless in comparison to a battle that was soon to be fought above them, in the heart of the high heavens, at the very center of the Silver City, the most important place in all of the high heavens, said to be the spine of the primordial being Anu, and the location where every last denizen of the high heavens is sung into creation. The Crystal Arch. The Crystal Arch is the origin, the conduit, the very source of the power that flowed through each and every warrior of the heavenly host. It is from this great spire that the power used by the heavenly host, the power used by the angels, sprang forth. All light radiates from this sacred spire, and in all the universe, there is no place more revered and sacred than the Crystal Arch. It has been shown that when all of the angels are in sync with the gentle and harmonious rhythm created by the Crystal Arch, an angel may be born. In this, the Crystal Arch is the high heaven's greatest strength and its greatest weakness. Should the arch be corrupted, the angels and the heavenly host will be powerless, their wings clipped, grounded. Should the arch topple, then the high heavens themselves will fall. It was this fact that drove the last savior of the high heavens to ascend the great staircase which led to his peak. Their armor clinked as their sword glowed with power that cut through their enemies with each swing of their sword. The figure ducked underneath a swing that came from a tall and imposing demon, before they drove their sword deep into the demon's chest, causing it to roar in pain, before they kicked the demon off the edge of the great staircase, and fell to their doom. The figure wasted no time, and charged forward, cutting through the coterie of demons, as they poured down the staircase from the top of the Crystal Arch. At the top of the staircase, two demons, aspects of terror, flanked an impressive knight-like figure, their armor seemingly forged from demon bones, their figure towering over any mere man, and their form casting an even deeper shadow than what was already there. The figure looked upon the warrior who slayed the demons that swarmed against him, and their hellish red eyes glowed brighter, as they narrowed. The two aspects of terror flanking him snarled and hissed, as they looked at the powerful figure. The demonic knight raised a single hand, and spoke with an uncaring yet piercing tone to his voice, "Remove the aberration, swiftly." In less than the time it took to blink, the two aspects of terror launched themselves onto the staircase, charging upon the figure slaughtering their brethren. Meanwhile, the demon merely crossed their arms, and watched. The figure slammed their sword deep into the chest of a slobbering demon, as they tried to drive their weapon deep into their skull. The figure pushed the demon off of their sword, ready to swing it again. Only for them to be toppled over, as one of the aspects of terror jumped on them, and knocked the sword right out of their hands, slobbering, as they tried to drive their slavering jaws into their throat. The figure grunted and cursed, as they tried to push the aspect of terror off of them, to no avail, as the demon was simply too intent on killing them. The other aspect of terror crowed and roared from the sidelines, as they slowly stalked forward, their claws seemingly growing, as they're ready to pounce and attack at a moment's notice. The figure kept pushing against the demon, which finally began to give way, and thus allowed for the figure to reach towards their belt, unhitching his small dagger, glistening with a white smoky ore. The figure gave out a roar cry, as the demon shot their head forward, in an attempt to kill the figure beneath them. At the same time, the figure drove the dagger upwards, piercing through the aspect of terror's upper jaw, going straight through the top of their head, killing them instantly. The other aspect of terror screeched at this, and leapt at the one who had slain its brother. The figure, having free use of their limbs again, reached, and grasped the hilt of their falling blade, and swung it just, as the demons swung their savage and oppressive claws at them. With a cry of agony the demon lurched over, and they looked towards their arm, and the still twitching limb which tumbled down the staircase. The figure pushed the dead demon off of them, and turned towards the now one-armed aspect of terror, their black and boiling blood dripping onto the stairs beneath it, as they howled in pain. The figure tightly clenched his sword, and leapt at the demon, their sword slicing through the air. The demon clearly heard the sound of the sword cutting through the tainted air of the high heavens, and turned their attention towards the one who had sliced off his arm, just in time to see the blade the figure wielded before his vision went black, as the glistening blade bisected the demon's skull, top to bottom. At the top of the staircase, the demonic knight visibly clenched his fingers, as he uncrossed his arms. At the same time, the figure ripped their sword out of the demon's head, and let its corpse tumble down the steps, and looked up to the top of the staircase, where the demon knight looked down upon the slayer of the two aspects of terror. The figure narrowed their eyes, and spoke, "It is time for you to join your brotherson, the burning hell's demon." The demonic knight simply stared down at the figure, their gaze promising cruelty and punishment for all time. The figure frowned and began to ascend the stairs once more. Crash, only for the figure to have to dodge, as the demonic knight jumped off of the top of the stairs and crashed right where they had just been standing, causing the staircase to crack, as the demonic knight suddenly swung a massive war axe, blazing with unholy fire at the figure, barely being blocked by the figure's sword. Clang, the clashing of the two sharp edges sent blistering sparks outward, as the two warriors pressed against the other. The demonic knight grasped the handle of his axe and pushed forward, his opponent being pushed back in the process. Take solace in the knowledge that you and the angels shall share the high heavens, as your tomb. The demon pressed their weapon against their opponent. The figure snarled and pushed back against the demon, not before you, and kicked the demon in the knee, bending it backwards. The demon howled in pain, loosening their grip on their weapon. The momentary distraction was enough for the warrior to plunge their blade forward, driving it deep into the throat of the demonic knight. The demon was silenced, the only sound being made was the gurgling of blood, as they stumbled back, the blade slipping from their throat, as they fell back, falling off the edge of the great staircase to the battle below. The figure stood there for a moment, and with a flick of the wrist, forced the majority of their blood off of the blade, before they grasped their luminous dagger in their other hand, and turned towards the ascending stairs. A frown on their face, and a steel gaze sprang upon their visage, and they swiftly made haste towards the top of the staircase. To the top of the crystal arch. The warrior ascended to the final step and marched upon the platform, their weapons held at the ready. And their voices echoed as they let loose a war cry, Diablo. It was there, atop the crystal arch, that the source of the despair below beheld the ruin of the high heavens, as they stood at the edge of the crystal arch's peak, scrutinizing and inspecting the carnage their armies wrought upon the broken forces of the heavenly host. Entire citadels fell within its gaze, burning, as the fires of the burning hells stormed through the broken crossroads and terraces of the high heavens. Angels rounded up and slaughtered by the hundreds, unable to fight back, unable to rise up to stop their demonic oppressors, as their armor shattered, and with it, their life force, extinguished. This was the scene that the Lord of Terror beheld, the scene the primeval bore witness to, the scene that Diablo so long yearned for, the scene that was being interrupted by the interloper behind him. It was at this moment that Diablo slowly turned his head, and looked upon the warrior who had fought through his armies. A dismissive glance, and a dark chuckle was all that greeted them. So, the Nephilim has come. The warrior Nephilim stepped forward, their sword raised, pointed at Diablo. It was over, Diablo. Today you, your evil, and the evil your entire race represents will fall, once and for all. Their voice echoed across the terrace atop the crystal arch, holding such confidence, such conviction, that lesser men would tremble before the intensity of such a voice. But Diablo was no lesser man. The primeval's only response was a low and dark laughter, which only grew in intensity, until the sound of his laughter echoed across the crystal arch like a low rumble. The force of the laughter shook the crystal arch was enough to cause the Nephilim to lose their footing, and stumble to end up on one knee. Diablo soon ceased his laughter, and began to walk along the edge of the arch. "You haven't an inkling, Nephilim." Diablo held out his arm, a single finger outstretched, "the dark exile, and our imprisonment within the soul stones, my own eventual return to life in the wretched Tristram, and eventual defeat, along with the possession of the one who defeated me." He had all his fingers outstretched, which he then closed into a fist. "The release of my brothers, and the vanquishing of our soulstones upon the Hellforge." He turned towards the Nephilim, a dark glint of mirth in his eyes. "I required a proper vessel, one which could contain my power, and more, and my servant was more than willing to sire me one. I required the power of all of the great evils, and you, and your comrades handed it to me, locked in the black soulstone." The Nephilim stood back up, their teeth bared, as their hands tightened around their weapons. Diablo stood tall and outstretched his arms, "And here you are, having the gall to suggest that this day is my last." Diablo erupted into laughter, as he pointed towards the burning high heavens. "Look around you, Nephilim, look upon the burning remnants of the high heavens." Broken, divided, Diablo turned, and looked upon the high heavens, and the Angelus Council. Leaderless since the world stone shattered, and Melthal fled, the once mighty Tyrell fell from grace, and imperious. Diablo chuckled, and looked upon another burning spire. His own pride would never allow him to side with an abomination such as you, Nephilim. The Nephilim let loose a war cry, and charged at Diablo, as his back was turned. Diablo did not move from his position, as the Nephilim swung their blade, the sword blazing with unearthly light. Only for the Nephilim to be knocked away, smashing into the walls of the crystal arch, causing their sword to fall from his hands, and slide across the ground, far out of their reach. Diablo snorted, as he turned his body, facing the Nephilim, as they tried to push themselves back up. "The seven evils are one within me, Nephilim. Even if you somehow manage to kill off my forces, I alone am legion." The Nephilim stood tall, and grasped his dagger. "Then killing you will be 7 times the pleasure." The Nephilim let loose a battle cry, and charged forwards. Diablo took in a deep breath, and let loose a deafening roar. The shock wave shattered the ground beneath Diablo, as it charged towards Nephilim. The Nephilim saw the incoming wave, and swung their white blazing dagger, slicing through the wave of destruction, and leapt forward. Diablo snarled and did the same, swinging his arm in a swift slash. Clang, which connected with the Nephilim's dagger, and a wave of light and darkness clashed against one another as the Nephilim and Diablo pressed for dominance. Diablo growled and swung their other arm at the Nephilim, their blade ready to carve through the Nephilim's flesh. The Nephilim saw this and pushed against Diablo with all their strength, causing them to get pushed back away from the primeval, dodging the incoming blade which would no doubt have ended or severely injured him at best. Diablo snarled and growled, "Is that all, Nephilim?" The Nephilim glared at Diablo, not even close. Diablo's eyes glowed with an unholy light, as his mouth suddenly began to glow with a blistering inferno. Fire crawled across his back, flowing upon the jagged spines before they crawled over his shoulders and wrapped around his arms. The Nephilim readied his dagger, preparing for whatever Diablo threw at him. The fires condensed into the palms of Diablo's hands, forming ever-shifting spheres of fire, swirling like a maelstrom. In but a single instant, Diablo threw the 2 balls of fire, which hurtled to the Nephilim. The Nephilim tensed their stance and outstretched their arm, glowing runes flashing all along its length as the energy pulled into their palm. In a single instant, a beam of light shot out of the Nephilim's palm, ripping through the spheres of fire, dispersing them as the beam of light shot towards Diablo. Diablo let loose a guttural snarl and simply slashed his claw against the beam of light, causing it to shatter like glass as the light particles flew through the air. The Nephilim smirked at this, and the runes on their arms glowed brighter. Boom. In an instant, the light particles exploded around the primeval and sent him toppling over as he roared in agony. Diablo tumbled backwards, losing his footing, causing him to fall upon his back as the whole of his body was covered in burns. The Nephilim saw this and then snapped their gaze to their sword, lying at the other side of the arch's terrace. Swiftly turning the whole of their body, they sprinted towards their fallen sword, while Diablo slowly pushed himself up. The Nephilim was halfway to the blade when Diablo pushed himself to his knees and let loose a roar, "Enough." And with that he shot his arm forward, unleashing a shockwave that went straight towards the Nephilim. As the Nephilim was about to make the final leap to their sword, they were suddenly shot off their feet, crashing into the pillars which stood tall within the crystal arch. Diablo chose this moment to stand to his full height, and he spoke, "You have proven yourself a rather disdainful nuisance, Nephilim." The Nephilim stood up and glared towards Diablo, but the edge of their gaze saw something. Against their better judgment, they turned their heads. And their eyes whitened in horror. Crawling across the outer rim of the crystal arch, the flames of the burning hells rode forth like a horse-drawn legion. Diablo chortled, the fires of the burning hells responding to his whim, "Let us see if you are such a nuisance in my realm of terror." The Nephilim looked around, as the fires of the burning hells consumed more and more of the crystal arch. Their gaze then shifted to their sword, soon to be consumed by the fires. With swift action, the Nephilim charged towards their sword and reached out to it as they leapt forward. The fires of the burning hells suddenly wrapped around the blade of the sword. Then the Nephilim wrapped their hand around the hilt. The Nephilim found themselves lost in a realm of shadows. In the realm of terror. The dark chuckle echoed throughout the shadows, and the Nephilim suddenly turned around, and they held out the hand they had grabbed their sword with. Only to find that the sword they had grabbed was lacking its blade. What? They looked upon the hilt which had once been the vessel for their blade, now empty of it. The dark chuckle turned into crushing laughter, as a dark and terrible voice echoed within the Nephilim's head, "And how your terror begins, Nephilim. Trapped in my realm of terror, all of your fears shall be laid bare, embodied in physical form. Only by defeating them can you ever leave this place." The dark laughter softened, and the voice only deepened in malice, but none have ever crawled from the depths of their own terror, none ever will. The Nephilim looked around, as they found the darkness closing in around them, until they could not even see the hilt of what once was their sword. They heard the patter of footsteps behind them, and they swung around where they heard the sound. Only for their hand to pass through a broken visage, formed of shadows. Cursing, they looked around, and back down at their hand, where they managed to make out the brief outline of the hilt of their sword. They had been pulled into the realm of terror by the fires of the burning hells, that much had been clear. The blade of their sword had to be in here somewhere. The Nephilim began to look around, in the hopes that the light of their sword would be able to shine through the darkness. Looking for something. The Nephilim suddenly shot around, and swung towards the shadow that had spoken, to find nothing. Gritting their teeth, they roared in anger, as a soft and human laughter echoed through the dark realm. Cursing, they began to run through the shadows, as the human laughter began to turn dark and malevolent. Arur. The Nephilim's eyes whitened for a moment before they ducked under a sweeping claw strike from the darkness. The Nephilim looked around, trying to find the source of the attack. Then they remembered what the arm and claw looked like. It looked like Diablo's arm, yet it was as if it was compassed solely of shadows. "How does your fear taste, Nephilim?" The Nephilim swung around, looking left and right for any signal to where the Lord of Terror might be. "Can you feel your death approaching, Nephilim?" The Nephilim swung their arm out, their eyes filled with anger. They could see absolutely nothing in this infernal place. "Tell me, Nephilim, do you fear death?" The Nephilim scowled and shouted, "I am not afraid of death, and I am not afraid of you, Diablo." The voice in the darkness chuckled cruelly as the shadows began to part in front of the Nephilim. "Oh, perhaps, but you are afraid of something, aren't you?" The Nephilim snorted coldly. "You think so?" he asked with obvious disdain. The dark laughter of Diablo broke forward. "Think? No, I know, it is what I have always known, what I always will know, the greatest fear of every last living being, in every single realm." The shadows continued to part in front of the Nephilim, and the eyes of the Nephilim narrowed as their eyes pierced through the shadows, only for them to whiten again at the sight before them. Their old village burned to the ground by the demon hordes over 20 years prior. Your greatest fear is that after you have done, sacrificed, and destroyed, that even as you die, you will never have made a difference. The Nephilim looked around as the shadows continued to part, as the remnants of their old village became clear to them. The memories and trauma they had repressed over the years came pushing through full force. Diablo chuckled within the shadows. "Do you remember, Nephilim? How my demons slaughtered your village like cattle, how your beloved family was ripped apart and burned to ashes." The Nephilim trembled as the memories replayed themselves at the forefront of their mind. They saw their neighbors be torn through by demons as they ravaged her home. They saw the soldiers who were supposed to protect them flee in fear, only to be trampled by demons who flew through the skies. They saw their parents be ripped apart, bisected, and bifurcated, as the demons savagely feasted on their flesh and bones. They saw their little brother whimpering for help, and what did she do? Nothing but watch as the demons dragged her baby brother away, and whimpered as she heard his screams as he was torn to pieces. "You will never wake from this nightmare. You will never defeat your own terror, no matter how powerful you have become. Your strength, your Nephilim power, it is useless in this realm." She slowly fell to her knees as she tightened her grip around the hilt of her former sword, while the shadows condensed behind her, and the visage of Diablo began to take shape. "So tell me, Nephilim, how does it feel, knowing that you have failed everyone who depended on you?" She did not give Diablo an answer. Instead, she looked down to her hands, to the hilt of her sword. Diablo was right. She was afraid that after all she had done, that no matter what she did, she would never make a difference. No matter what she did, no matter how many demons she slew, that fear was always dominating her mind. Even after she had defeated Asmodin and Belial, that fear never left her, and when Lee was possessed by Diablo, that fear only grew. But no more. Even if she died today, she would not let Diablo have his victory. If she died, so would he. Diablo raised a shadowy arm, and chuckled, "Time to die, Nephilim," and brought his arm swinging down. The Nephilim's sword hilt suddenly glowed with a bright light, and from the hilt, a silver blade erupted. Just as Diablo's claws were about to tear through the Nephilim, she dodged out of the way, and swung the sword, severing his arm, forcing it to disperse into shadows. Diablo's demonic eyes widened for a moment, before the glint of the sword caught his attention. Just in time to see it glint before it was rammed through his bottom jaw, straight through his top jaw, and through the top of his head. The Nephilim drove the blade deeper in, and then in a war cry, ripped it from her foe's skull, bifurcating it. The shadowy form of Diablo erupted in smoke, and the realm of terror began to slowly vanish. The Nephilim looked down at their sword, so vibrant, so powerful. Just like her. She tightened her grip, and looked up. The battle was far from over, and whatever it was that faced her when the realm of terror fell apart around her, she would be red. Her inner monologue was broken when out of the broken shadows, the hand of Diablo shot forward, and wrapped itself around her throat, forcing her to gasp in pain, as her sword fell from her grip. Before it touched the ground, it was grabbed in mid-air by Diablo's other hand. The Nephilim choked in pain, as Diablo lifted her up, and gazed into her eyes. Diablo then looked down at the sword she had wielded against him, and snorted, "I suppose congratulations are in order. You are the first, Nephilim or otherwise, to have ever escaped the realm of terror." He lifted the sword up, "But I do wonder, would you have been as successful without this sword?" Nephilim. Diablo then proceeded to nonchalantly toss the sword over the edge of the crystal arch, where it fell into the battlefield below. The Nephilim stared in horror, only for Diablo to tighten his grip around her throat, and chuckled in a dark throaty growl. "Did you really think that you stood a chance against me, Nephilim? If I had wanted to kill you before, I would have destroyed you before you even reached the first step of the great staircase." The Nephilim gasped, as Diablo dropped her, and then pressed his foot against her chest, slowly crushing her, as her eyes became bloodshot, as she desperately gasped for air. "But a quick death is far too good for you, Nephilim. I want to make you suffer, I want to make you scream, and beg for mercy. In fact, how about we start now?" Diablo swiftly removed his foot from her chest, and before she could even gasp for air, Diablo swung his tail, the spikes along its length digging into her flesh, as she was smashed across the ground, sending her hurtling into the walls of the crystal arch. As she tried to push herself, coughing and wheezing in agony, Diablo stomped to her, and grabbed her legs, and proceeded to savagely swing her around, and smash her into the ground. She coughed up large globules of blood, as she tried to reach for her dagger, only for her arm to be grabbed by Diablo, as he swung her back into the ground, twisting the arm out of place. Diablo chuckled, as she lay bleeding on the ground, and kicked her in the sides, rolling her onto her back, as he pressed his foot against her chest. He felt her ribs crack as he applied further pressure against her chest, her eyes nearly popping out of her sockets as she desperately gasped for air. Diablo looked down upon her and chuckled cruelly. All that you have known, all that you have loved, will now die with you. Nephilim.he outstretched his arm, the blade upon it glowing with his dark power, as he swung it downwards, aimed straight for the Nephilim's head. A chink skulch. Only for Diablo to briefly slow, as he heard the unsheathing of a blade, and for indescribable agony to rip through his head, as the sword tore through his eye. Diablo stumbled back, as he reached up to grasp the sword in his eye, releasing the Nephilim from underfoot. The sword was driven deeper in, as whoever wielded it applied further pressure on the driving force of the blade. Diablo roared in pain, and finally grasped the leg of whoever wielded the blade, and tore them off, throwing them far away from him, taking the sword with them. Diablo looked up with his remaining eye, and for the first time, his eyes widened in shock, as he saw who it was before him. Tyrell shouted in disbelief, as there before him was the former Archangel Tyrell, who had fallen from the heavens, and became mortal. Or, so he had believed. For standing before him, while mortal in appearance, he bore the starting ropes of what he could tell were Archangel wings, while Tyrell's face was already half missing, while a hood adorned his head, the sword Eldarin, which had been used to fell countless demons in hand, embodied in what so deeply resembled its true glory. Diablo snarled, as his damaged eye was allying with his unholy malice, as it tried to reform itself. How are you? You fell for Tyrell. How are you an Archangel once again? He spoke in anger and hate, his voice promising punishment for the Archangel of Justice before him. Tyrell frowned at Diablo with what little was left of his face. Unlike me, former Lieutenant Iswell, I fell willingly. I could return to the high heavens whenever I desired, and so I have. Diablo. Diablo snarled, if that is the case, then why are you not powerless like your breath? Diablo silenced himself, as 3 pillars of light erupted in front of him, and he covered his eyes. After a few moments, he looked up again, and his eyes narrowed, as he beheld the sight before him. Boreal, Archangel of Hope. Ethereal, Archangel of Fate. Imperious, Archangel of Valor, in hand, the broken remains of the Solarian, the Spear of Valor. Each of them, bearing their wings. Diablo snarled, the sight before him answering his question. So, it seems even with the corruption of the Crystal Arch, the Archangels are not as powerless as I had thought. I should have expected this. Tyrell stepped forward, his sword drawn. We are united against you, Diablo, even as the primeval. You will not have your victory this day. We shall die before we allow you your victory. Diablo snarled at them, so be it, and charged upon them. Tyrell swung his blade at Diablo, which he blocked with the blades upon his arms. Imperious took to the skies, as he brought the tip of Solarian down, slashing it into the crest upon Diablo's head. Boreal and Ethereal remained at a distance, as they began to chant in the tongue of the high heavens, spheres of holy light forming in their hands. Tyrell continued to slash at Diablo, while the Nephilim leapt over Tyrell, driving her dagger into the still healing wound made by Tyrell moments before. In a cry of anger, Diablo grabbed the Nephilim by their legs, and was about to throw them, only for Imperious to ram the tip of Solarian deep into Diablo's arm, and slashed at Imperious. The Nephilim leapt off of Diablo, as Tyrell leapt back as well. Diablo snarled, and turned to charge upon them. Only for him to roar in agony, as Ethereal and Oriel leapt upon him, and struck him with the spheres of light, burning into his flesh and bone. Diablo was pushed back, as his arms were skinned, and his bones fragmented, part of his lower jaw being revealed from the attack, along with his ribs. Imperious saw a moment to charge in, and did so. Tyrell and the Nephilim followed suit. Diablo tried to strike at them, only for them to dodge out of his way, and proceed with their attack. Tyrell thrust Eldarin deep between Diablo's ribs, while Imperious stabbed into his remaining eye. As Diablo roared in agony, the Nephilim charged a powerful light through her arms, the runes along her arms glowing brightly, as she leapt upon Diablo, just in time for his other eye to finish healing. Diablo saw her incoming strike, but was unable to dodge or block her. The Nephilim swung a powerful strike upon the side of Diablo's face with such force that the ground around them cracked and crumbled beneath them, and Diablo was sent hurtling back, crashing so hard into the walls of the Crystal Arch that they crumbled behind him. Diablo groaned in pain, as his dark power fought to heal his wounds, grasping onto the sides of the Crystal Arch, as he tried to push himself up. Tyrell saw Diablo begin to stand, and ran forward, his sword poised to deliver what he hoped would be the final blow. Diablo's eyes snapped open, one healed, the other filled with his dark power, and he took in a deep breath. Imperious saw this, and shouted, Tyrell, no. Tyrell did not cease, and leapt upon Diablo, as his wings began to glow even brighter, and his face completely vanished beneath his hood. Then Diablo opened his mouth, and let loose a deafening roar, which tore through the top of the Crystal Arch, smashing into Tyrell, and sending him careening backwards. Imperious, Oriel, and Ethereal were not able to move out of the way, and suffered the same fate. The Nephilim had been able to get out of the way of the primary wave, but was still sent careening off to the side. Diablo completely stood up, and snarled, even united, you fool. And he stomped forward, and he grabbed the closest angel, lifting off the ground. Oreo was now being squeezed within his grip, groaning in pain, as she tried to pry his fingers off of her. Diablo snarled, and raised his arm, the blade upon it growing in length, and he was about to swing. Shing. Only for Diablo to feel a sudden weightlessness around his arm, before he felt absolutely nothing but pain. Diablo released Oreo, and roared in agony, as he clutched the stump where his arm used to be, his blood boiling out, as he looked up to the one who had sliced off his arm. At the same time, the other archangels looked, as well. Oreo was the first to speak. Floating in the air, their weapon held out, covered in the blood which had once dwelled within Diablo, was the Archangel of Wisdom, Malthal himself. Diablo roared in anger, and tried to grab the Archangel, only for them to vanish, and appear with the other 4 archangels. Diablo snarled, and looked at them, his rage evident, as his eyes burned in vengeful fury, his wounds still slowly healing. Malthal held out his hand, and shot forward. It did not take a second afterwards for the other 4 archangels to follow his lead. Diablo ducked and slashed at the archangels, as they slashed, burned, and beat into his flesh. He slashed at Malthal once more, who blocked it with his weapon, whilst Oreo stroked the side of his face. Diablo stumbled back, and swung his tail at them. Imperius flipped over Diablo's tail, and vanished in a plume of light, and stabbed the tip of Solarian deep into the side of Diablo's face. Tyrell followed up, and stabbed Eldarin into Diablo's shoulder. Ithral prepared a stream of light energy, as the other 4 battered at his defenses. Malthal looked back at Ithral, and nodded his head. Ithral nodded, as well, and shot the stream of light at Diablo. The other archangels swiftly got out of the way, just as Diablo turned to face them, and the stream of light barreled into his chest, burning away at his defenses. The archangels flanked Ithral, their weapons at the ready, as they waited to make their next move. Diablo painted, as he grasped a falling pillar, crushing it, as he stood up. The stream of light had damaged his bones, but his demonic power was quickly healing him. Off to the side, the Nephilim saw the battle at hand, and cursed, as she tried to find a weapon. But to her anger, all her weapons had been used up, or were lost to her. The archangels were not pulling any punches either, and so far they had not been able to injure Diablo enough to make sure he stayed down. Cursing, she kept looking around. If they didn't defeat Diablo soon, then the high heavens would fall. But what could possibly be enough to deliver the killing blow? In that instant, she saw the severed arm of Diablo off to the side, on the back of it, a blade that Diablo had used to block Eldarin, and many of the other strikes done against him. With a deep and intense look, she ran to the severed arm, and swiftly proceeded to attempt to rip the blade off, a harder task than she had expected. Tyrell had seen what she was doing, and realized her plan. He turned to the others, keep him busy. And he shot off to aid the Nephilim. Imperius scowled, but a single motion from Malthal silenced him, and they continued the offensive against Diablo. The Nephilim grit her teeth, as she failed to rip the blade off of Diablo's arm. Shing. Only for her to stumble back, as Tyrell sliced the tendons with his sword blazing with holy light, severing the blade from the arm. The Nephilim looked up at Tyrell, who nodded his head, and then flew to aid his comrades. Diablo slashed and weaved at them, managed to injure Malthal, as he slashed his blade at him, in addition to swiping against him with his tail. Imperius and Oriel struck against him with heavenly light, as they pushed him closer to the edge of the crystal arch. Tyrell weaved through Diablo's assault, and once more drove Eldarin deep into his eyes. Malthal looked back, and although it could not be seen, a pleased look glinted within. A single motion was all Malthal needed to give, and the archangels jumped away from the writhing primeval. Diablo roared in anger, and turned, ready to attack them. Oriel responded by sending a ball of heavenly light directly into his face, blinding him. Diablo roared in rage and agony, and grasped at his eyes, stumbling further back, until his feet were pressed right at the edge of the broken remains of the crystal arch's walls. Diablo snarled, and snapped his eyes open, as his vision returned. The last thing he saw before tearing pain ripped through him, was the Nephilim, holding the blade which had once been on his severed arm, charging at him. And the blade itself, ripping through the front of his damaged chest. A roar of pain echoed across the crystal arch's terrace, as Diablo stumbled, his foot falling off the edge, and his remaining arm shot out, grabbing onto the edge of the wall, while the Nephilim continued to jam the blade into his chest. The Nephilim grit her teeth in pain, as she clenched the blade tightly, cutting into her hands, as she pushed the blade through his damaged flesh, and breaking the barrier of the front of his ribcage. Diablo snarled, and tried to pull himself up, and despite his wounded condition, he was succeeding. The Nephilim saw this, and flashes of the horror she saw which led her into the life she was in now played in her mind. With a raging fire burning in her eyes, she felt the runes adorning her body glow brighter, as her own eyes began to glow, as she shouted, "Go to hell." And with a final push, she jammed the blade further into Diablo, ripping through his ribsage, his organs, and right through his back. The word Diablo roared, as his body was overcome from the sheer torment the wound caused him. With a loud scraping sound, as his claws dragged across the broken pieces of the crystal arch, Diablo released his hold upon the broken walls of the crystal arch, and with the Nephilim, fell to his death. The Nephilim did not let go of the blade, instead she tried to drive it further in, her anger and rage overriding her reason, as she sought to ensure Diablo died. She wanted the primeval to pay for what his hordes had done to her village, to her family, to her. If she had to die to do that, then so be it. Diablo looked up at the enraged eyes of the Nephilim, and for the first time, Diablo felt so surprisingly mortal. Here he was, falling to his doom, after his great moment of triumph, felled by the hands of a united front that he had never considered. Diablo turned his attention to himself, as he suddenly began to feel parts of himself fade away. His tail and legs were disintegrating into broken ashes, as he fell, and it was swiftly affecting the rest of his body. Diablo was dying, but there was something different in the way he was dying this time. Diablo had died many times before, he knew the sensation of death all too well, how his soul would be drawn into the abyss to be reborn again, but that pull was not there, that sense of inevitability was replaced by one of nothingness. Diablo was not going to be reborn this time, he was never coming back. He was dying for good this time. His eyes were filled with horror at this revelation, and his gaze turned to his chest, to where the black soul stone lay buried within him. His teeth grit tightly, knowing that if he desired to live, there was only one way to do it. He lifted his remaining arm, and in a motion more swift than any blow he had ever dealt, Diablo rammed his clawed hand into his chest, and wrapped his clawed fingers around the black soul stone, and he began to squeeze. The Nephilim saw what he had done, and her own eyes widened, as the glow of her eyes, and the runes upon her body dimmed. Diablo raised his head, and looked into the eyes of the Nephilim, and snarled, "I will never die." Then he crushed the black soul stone in his chest. The Nephilim was thrown back by the explosion caused by this event, as Diablo's body combusted, and the black soul stone exploded forth, sending hundreds of shards into the sky, each shard glowing with demonic power. The shards shot through the skies like unholy comets, before suddenly, they vanished through what appeared to be miniature rifts, as if the high heavens themselves rejected their presence. The Nephilim stared off into the skies, as she fell, and she saw the shards of the black soul stone, imbued with the demonic power of Diablo, vanish through rifts, their destination unknown. No doubt her eyes were brimming with tears, as she was overcome by despair. Her eyes looked to the city below, and she saw the ground below her. The shimmer touched her pupils. A stabbing pain tore through her chest. The Nephilim gasped in pain, as blood poured from her mouth, and the gaping wound in her chest. Coughing pitifully, as she felt her lungs begin to fill with blood, as the rest of it oozed out of her wound. Her head fell, as her strength left her, and she looked upon the instrument which had been her ultimate end. Sheathed held first in the ground, its blade standing upwards, ripping through her chest, and stained with her blood was her own sword. Coughing pathetically, she slowly began to close her eyes, a single tear dripping down her face. As it fell from her face, it landed in the pool of her own blood beneath her, sending ripples through the pool of blood which reflected her features. In the end, her greatest fear had come to pass. She had died, and not made a single bit of difference. Atop the crystal arch, the archangels looked down upon the high heavens when they saw Diablo's final act, and the soulstones vanishing from the high heavens, imbued with the power of the burning hells. Tyrell fell to his knees, his armor slowly returning to him, as his wings grew anew, as his voice conveyed his horror. No. Oriel slowly walked up behind Tyrell, and gently placed a hand on his shoulder, as she too looked upon the high heavens. Imperius clenched his fist, before he turned away from the high heavens, and marched towards the staircase leaving the crystal arch. Malthal stepped forward, and spoke, "The battle is ours, the war has only just begun." Sanctuary. Sanctuary, a place between the high heavens and the burning hells, which had at one point been created to serve as a sanctuary for angels and demons who grew tired of the great conflict, the war to decide who would dominate all creation. It was in this realm that the first race of man was born, the Nephilim. But thanks to the machinations of the archangel, Inarius, the realm of sanctuary was cloaked from the burning hells and the high heavens, and at the same time, the Nephilim grew weaker with each passing generation. This did not sit well with Inarius's demon lover, Lilith, who had slaughtered all the other demons and angels in sanctuary, so she could turn the Nephilim into her own personal army. And so sanctuary became a new battlefield in the great conflict. High above the skies of sanctuary, the skies crackled with crimson lightning, as beams of burning light fell from the sky, crashing into the earth below. One such stream of light fell after the others, and the light surrounding it dissipated, as it simply fell. It revealed a black stone, tinted a crimson color, no larger than a child's pinky finger, glowing with an unholy light. This stone fell to the earth, jutting out of the ground, as the rain fell, and a river began to glow upon it, moving it from its position, and letting it flow downstream, its glow never fading. The stone finally ceased its flow, as it reached the bottom of a hill, and it floated in a small pool of murky water, before it slowly began to sink downward. As it sank below the water, its glow lit up the pool of water, until the weakened soil of the hill suddenly broke free, tumbling down the hill, and splashing into the puddle, burying the stone along with it. Time skip. In a great forest in the mountains, a small group of cloaked individuals cut through the undergrowth, while other members of the group carried a stretcher with a wounded man atop it. One of the cloaked individuals cursed, as their sword broke. Damn Senju. What do they grow trees of? Iron. They tossed their broken sword to the ground, and began to perform signs with their hands. Another figure reached out, and grabbed their hands, squeezing tightly. Are you crazy? We are deep in Senju territory. Do you want to make it easier for them to find us? The figure said with a scathing tone. The man on the stretcher groaned in pain, and began to cough up blood. One of the cloaked figures ran up to the stretcher, and placed a hand to their forehead. Damn it all, he is getting worse. He looked at 3 other figures. You 3, set up a perimeter. We have to perform emergency treatment now. The 3 figures nodded, and quickly shot into the trees. One of the figures suddenly appeared atop a tree branch, and looked around, searching for any sign of activity. When they found none, they closed their eyes, and performed a hand sign. A pulse echoed from their body, and traveled through the tree line. They sighed, and looked up, and reached up to the hood covering their head, and swiftly removed it. The figure was a pale individual with onyx black hair, with eyes that matched. Their facial complexion was soft, though definitely masculine in some respects. Taking a step forward, they fell from the branch they stood upon into the forest below. Landing softly, they looked around before standing upright, and began to walk forward. Sinkusha. The figure snapped their head to their left, hearing a whisper. They looked around, their eyes darting back and forth as they grasped the hilt of their sword, which was slung across their back. They swiftly brought it out, and held it out, ready to strike at a moment's notice. Sinkusha. The figure Sinkusha looked behind himself, as he heard the whisper come from behind him. Come to me, Sinkusha. Sinkusha hesitantly walked forward, as his eyes seemed to dim, as if some force was calling him, controlling him. He felt as if he were a passenger in his own body, existing within it, but holding absolutely no control over himself. Pushing past the undergrowth, hacking through the vines, he kept moving forward, never once taking note of his surroundings. In the trees above him, 2 cloaked figures looked down upon him, watching every move he made. The smaller of the 2 turned their head, and spoke in a defiant feminine voice. Should we kill him? The other figure seemed to stare down at Sinkusha, watching his movements. His movements were not erratic, he was not searching for something, he was headed for a destination. Raising their hand, and speaking in a deep masculine voice, no Uchiha would not risk going so deep into our territory without a reason. He turned his head to his comrade. We shall follow, and see what was so important he would risk his life for it. The female nodded her head, and looked back at Sinkusha. Sinkusha pushed past the vines, and low-hanging branches, his eyes devoid of any consciousness. Sinkusha, come to me, set me free. Sinkusha heeded the call, and pushed past the low-hanging branches, and moved forward, entering a small dead patch in the middle of the forest. The grass was dry, dead, nothing was alive here. There were even small skeletons belonging to assorted creatures of the wilderness. And in the center of the dead patch, there was a small distorted circle where even the soil was dead. Set me free. Sinkusha stumbled forward, falling to his knees, and he began to drag his fingers through the dead soil, ripping up the dirt and sand, even as his fingers were sliced open from the jagged parts of the soil. In the trees, the 2 figures watched in confusion and curiosity, as they saw Sinkusha digging his hands through the soil in the dead patch. What could he possibly have hidden here? Sinkusha kept digging only to stop, as he suddenly jerked back, his finger being sliced open from an unusually sharp object in the soil. Yes. Sinkusha stared into the small hole he had made, and with a gasping noise, he reached in, and wrapped his fingers around what he had found, and stared at it. The black stone, which was tinted a deep crimson color, no larger than his son's pinky finger, glistening in the light with a dark and foreboding aura. Sinkusha. Sinkusha shot up, and turned his head. He saw another of his comrades running towards him, his face clearly holding annoyance. Damn it, Sinkusha, what the hell are you doing all the way out here? We need to get back to the caravan now. He grabbed Sinkusha by the arm, and tried to drag him. Sinkusha never moved an inch. The figure turned, and looked at him. Sinkusha stopped. He stopped mid-sentence, as he saw the look on Sinkusha's face. Sinkusha was staring, but not like a normal stare, that was something he could handle. This state was different, as if Sinkusha was looking at him, and through him. He shivered under Sinkusha's stare, Aniki. Sinkusha stared at his comrade, his little brother, as he tightened his grip around his sword and the stone in his hand. Kill. Sinkusha stared at his brother. His brother started, Senku. Squelch. His eyes widened in horror and pain, as he felt Sinkusha's blade drive through his chest, and he violently coughed up blood that was quickly filling his lungs. He slowly lifted his head, and looked into Sinkusha's eyes. Sinkusha's Sharingan eyes. His brother coughed, and tried to reach out. He gasped out, before his head fell over, the life extinguished from his body. In the trees, the 2 Senju stared in shock and horror, as Sinkusha swiftly removed the blade from his brother, and proceeded to look into his hand, where they saw the stone glow in his hand. Choosing that moment, they launched themselves from the tree. Sinkusha looked down at the stone, his vision fading in and out, as his eyes seemed to burn, but never once did he make a single motion to show he was in pain. Uchiha. Senkusha slowly looked upward, and he saw two senjus staring him down, their weapons drawn. The female senju spoke up, "Whatever you have there must be pretty valuable. How about you hand it over, and we will let you leave here with your life." Senkusha stared at the female senju, his eyes blazing with absolute fury. How dare the filthy senju suggest he hand over what was his? Senkusha snarled, "It is mine." The female senju snorted, "Alright, guess we'll just have to pry it from YAGHH. The female senju screamed in agony, as suddenly her legs were covered in black flames that swiftly began to crawl up her body, burning away her flesh. The other senju ran over to her, as she fell over, "No." And he was about to try and put out the fires. Senkusha saw this, and shouted, "I will not let you take it." The other senju suddenly jumped, as the black flames exploded in front of him, which caught the edges of his clothing. The effect was instant. The black flames began to consume the other senju's clothing, his screams of pain and agony echoing throughout the clearing, along with his female compatriot. It was not long until both were silenced, their bodies completely turned to ash. Senkusha painted, as he stared at them, his grip on the stone so tightly, his palm began to bleed from the pressure he was applying to it. As he panted, he stammered to himself, "It is mine." As he said this, the black flames began to spread, catching fire to the nearby undergrowth, spreading to the higher branches, a pillar of smoke and ash quickly forming, as the fires spread. Senkusha paid the flames no mind, his eyes still blurry, as he fell to his knees, and reached up, grabbing his face, as the pain soon became unbearable, and blood trickled from his eyes. He slowly began to open his eyes, as his vision began to return to him, and he stared into the crimson black stone in his palm, beholding his reflection on the stone's surface. Watching, as his Sharingan eye twisted and warped, the ring and the Tomo distorting and morphing together, forming a three-pointed star. Senkusha saw this, and a dark and cruel grin crossed his features as he raised his head. "It will all mine." Time skipped the founding of Konoha. Hashirama Senju stood in front of a great vault, fashioned from the hardest steel in all of the elemental nations, adorned with seals that had been developed and integrated by the finest Fuinjutsu masters in the known world. He sighed heavily, as he looked upon the vault, and sighed. He truly wished he did not need to construct the vault before him, but the events from 3 months prior had left him with little alternative. 2 months prior, the Uchiha clan had launched a full-scale assault upon Senju clan territory. It was a massacre, with the Uchiha killing a vast majority of the Senju clan, men, women, and even children. None were spared from their wrath. Hashirama had arrived after the assault had begun, and with the combined efforts of himself and his brother Tobirama, they had managed to break the back of the Uchiha forces. However, it was not long before the Uchiha clan launched their own counterattack, led by an Uchiha his Hashirama knew Madara Uchiha well. Hashirama and Madara fought one another, as their clans slaughtered one another around them. The two shinobi fought until their weapons broke, they fought until they exhausted themselves of chakra, and they fought until the final blow was dealt. By the end of it, Madara lay defeated, at Hashirama's mercy. However, instead of killing Madara, Hashirama proposed an end to the two clans' endless conflict. They proposed a way to finally live together in peace. Despite Madara's hatred for the Senju clan, the rest of his clan forced his hand, and so he agreed to Hashirama's treaty between the two, on the terms of the Senju clan. However, when the terms were presented, it almost sparked their conflict all over again. The Uchiha clan was forced to hand over vast reparations, much of their wealth, their weaponry, even ancient tablets which had been passed down from father, to son, to mother, to daughter for more generations than the Uchiha clan could remember, and countless other treasures of their clan. However, their desire for peace outweighed their desire to keep what they owned. So with indignant acceptance, the Uchiha clan handed over what they had. It was a small comfort to them that the only treasures the Senju could use without an Uchiha's help would be the wealth the Uchiha had accumulated over the years. Everything else was useless in their hands. Despite this, their treasures were still confiscated, as reparations for the great losses suffered by the Senju clan. And to ensure the Uchiha could never use them, a great vault was constructed to ensure no Uchiha could ever reclaim their lost treasures. Hashirama sighed heavily. He truly did not desire to do this, but it was necessary. He only hoped in time the Uchiha clan would change, and perhaps they could have their treasures returned to them. With a heavy sigh, he turned and looked at the samurai who stood behind him, each one carrying items which were at one time owned by the Uchiha. "Alright, start loading up the vault." The samurai had been sent as a neutral party by the daimyo of Hai no Kuni, who had sold the land which would soon be home to the first hidden village, to the Senju and Uchiha clans. They were there as a security force until the village had a stable government. For now, it was more or less run by a joint meeting between the various clan leaders of the clans, which had chosen to become a part of this new village. It was a slow process, but every great idea has a small beginning after all. One of the samurai lifted up a large chest and passed it off to a waiting samurai. Sighing heavily, wiping his brow, he turned back to the pile to grab something. In the corner of his peripheral vision, he caught sight of a light glimmer and turned his head to see what it was. Off in the corner of the pile, there was an ornate black box with golden handles. Curious, the samurai walked over to the box and looked it over. It certainly wasn't like anything he had ever seen, and he didn't remember anything like this being on the list of things to go into the vault. Turning his head, he looked back to a samurai speaking with Hashirama. Hey, I found something that I didn't see on the list. What should I do with it? The samurai and Hashirama turned to him. What is it? The samurai shrugged his shoulders. I'm not sure, it is some kind of black box with ornate drawings on it. He took a closer look. Wait, I think I see a name on it. Hashirama looked at the samurai. What is the name? He then looked at the samurai he had been talking to. Perhaps it was collected by accident. The samurai looked at the box. It said Senkusha Uchiha. The samurai talking with Hashirama curled an eye. Senkusha. He looked at Hashirama. Is there a Senkusha Uchiha that you know of? Hashirama looked down, as he tried to put a face to the name. After the Uchiha and Senju treaty, both Uchiha and Senju clan members had to be accounted for. Every man, woman, and child were to be noted, catalogued, and filed. He had memorized the names and faces of every single member of the Uchiha clan. But he could not put a face to the name Senkusha. No, but the name is very familiar, that I will admit. The samurai ran a finger over it and began to rub their fingers together. Well, whoever they are, they didn't take very good care of their stuff. This box is covered in dust. I don't think it has been opened in a while. The other samurai spoke up. Maybe it was just something they wanted to get rid of. Hashirama sighed. Maybe. The samurai stood up and pointed at the box. So, what should I do with this then? Hashirama sighed once more and pointed towards the vault. Just stick it in the vault with everything else. The samurai shrugged. Alright. He then proceeded to grab the handles of the box and made his way inside the vault. Other samurai were stacking the shelves of the vault, scrolls, crates, weapons, everything that the Senju clan couldn't use, but was taken from the Uchiha as reparations. The samurai finally stopped in front of an empty shelf and looked down at the box. Well, looks like you will be collecting dust here. He placed the box on the shelf, clapped his hands, and was about to turn away. Ichiro. The samurai stopped mid-turn and looked around. Ha, who said that? As he looked around, he realized the others had left the vault. He was alone. Scratching his head in confusion. What the? Ichiro. He jumped and turned in the direction he heard the voice. He could not help but quirk his head in confusion as he stared at the box. What? He asked himself. Ichiro set me free. Ichiro did not know what was going on, but for some reason, he began to reach for the box. Yes, Ichiro set me free. Ichiro's eyes glazed over as he continued to reach for the box. Ichiro. 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 Ichiro's eyes regained their light, and he turned his head to his side, seeing one of his comrades looking at him worriedly. Ichiro, are you alright? Ichiro stared at him. Yeah, he glanced back at the box. Yeah, I am fine. The samurai looked unconvinced. Are you sure? He looked at the box Ichiro had been staring at. You seem to have been staring into space. Ichiro looked back at the box. Yeah, I am fine. Blinking a couple times and rubbing his eyes, he smirked back at his friend. Hey, how about we go out for drinks? My treat. The samurai stared at him. Okay, who are you, and what have you done with Ichiro? Ichiro laughed and slapped the other samurai on the back. Ah, cut it out, Kajiro. We both know you cannot resist free drinks. The now named Kajiro stared at him for several seconds before his face split into a wide grin. Ha, can't argue with you there. He turned and headed off to leave the vault. Don't try and skip out on me again, Ichiro. Ichiro chuckled. Yeah, I know you old drunk you. He headed off after Kajiro, the two joking and laughing as they left the vault. Hashirama took one last glance into the vault before he took a heavy sigh and closed it shut, never knowing that his thoughtless decision had doomed all of mankind. Nearly a century had passed since the final confrontation between the Senju and Uchiha clans, where the Senju claimed victory over the Uchiha, and from that victory, the village of Konohagakure no Sado had been erected within the nation of Hai no Kuni, under the blessing of the daimyo himself. Since that time, Konoha had been a part of a great many battles to ensure its dominance and continued survival, as they had not been the only ones to forge a shinobi village. To the deserts in the southwest, where the sands burned the skin of those who walked upon its surface, the village of Sunagakure no Sado had been constituted, created from the nomadic clans, who for years had fought to control one oasis after another. They unified, as a means to survive, and it was not long before these clans, tribes, and small nomadic families erected a great wall to protect its citizens from the burning sands, while within the wall's confines, towering structures of mud and brick turned what was once a small tribal community into a bustling village. To the northwest of Hai no Kuni, hidden by the Rocky Mountain ranges, another village was constructed, which came to be known as Iwagakure no Sado. Carved from the rocky landscape by wandering tribes, which had banded together as resources become scarce, and populations within the tribes began to take a downward spiral. They consolidated an alliance, which at the time, was the only means to survive the bitter landscape. Within a matter of months, because of this alliance, the population spiked, as this village drew in a number of merchants and other wandering tribes, and for the first time, they had the safety to raise a family of more than just a single child. To the northeast, landlocked by a peninsula, a village had been begotten by warrior clans, and from the highest peaks at the center of the peninsula, the village of Kumagakure no Sato had been birthed. The nation of which they settled had few places in which farms or small villages could form. The entire peninsula was purely a survival scenario, where only the strongest and smartest fighters survived. Farmers and settlers had little chance of survival, as it occurred often that a night raid would destroy their farms and homes by the warrior clans who sought to keep their own alive. In time, however, the warrior tribes grew weary of the constant battle, and traveled to the center of the peninsula, climbed the high peaks, and found the bounty of harvest to be hidden in the clouds. To the seas in the east, on the greatest of the many islands, a village had been fashioned out of the blood and carnage which soaked the isolated islands. The islands, though close to one another, were still separated by a great sea, and each island contained resources and the likes that the other islands needed. Due to the isolation and the need to survive, the tribes which dotted the islands fought one another to take the resources they needed by force. Clans died off and were miraculously reborn 100 times over, until soon enough, the resources they had madly fought over began to dry up and die out. On one of the islands, however, one even more cut off from the others, yet closer to the mainland than any of them, the tribes had been able to acquire food and tools without the need for violence, and from this, a change had occurred, one that they shared with the nearby islands, extending a welcoming arm, giving food and tools that allowed the once isolated tribes to cultivate their own resources, and use the ones they still in a far more meticulous manner. It is because of this that the once murderous warrior tribes of these islands aggregated and consummated what would come to be known as Kumagakure no Sato. These 4 villages, along with Kanehagakure, were the first and arguably the mightiest of the villages that were birthed. These 5 villages in time came to be called the 5 Great Hidden Villages. Even still, smaller, yet formidable villages were birthed in between immense towering structures that were the 5 Great Hidden Villages. In the tall grasses to the east of Hai no Kuni, a farming community was born, and in time, to combat bandits and the occasional wandering shinobi, they turned their tools which had been used to cultivate life into weapons used solely to destroy it. From this, the village of Kusagakure no Sato was established, and in the towering forests to the northwest, a nomadic tribe settled beneath a great tree, in a region of the forests that to this day remains unknown. The nomadic tribe found something in those forests, which had caused them to become a deadly force. From this still hidden location, the village of Takigakure no Sato was forged. The formation and establishment of the villages allowed for trade, for a prosperous and healthy population to flourish and grow in relative safety. Before the villages formed, children were lucky to have a childhood, adults were lucky to live to 20, and most children were born from those who were still children themselves. With the birth of the hidden villages, the clan warrior era had ended, and the shinobi era had begun. Even after the establishment of the villages, the founders had been warrior clans, warrior tribes. They were born from conflict, all they knew was conflict, and so it was inevitable that conflict would resume, only this time, it was on a much grander scale than ever before, where entire nations of warriors would battle against one another. Even when battle didn't occur, the villages were in a constant state of silent war, and a constant arms race was occurring, each nation trying to stay one step ahead of their enemies. At the center of all this, at a constant crossroads between all these warring nations, was Kanehagakure itself. Because of this, they were at a tremendous disadvantage, but also possessed the greatest advantage. Because they had enemies on all sides, they were under constant threat from being invaded on multiple fronts. At the same time, their foes had to enter Hai no Kuni, Kanehagakure's territory, which they knew better than their enemies, which gave them a tremendous advantage against invading forces. They knew the terrain, they knew which way was which, and they knew how to bring their enemies into ambushes and choke points where they were ripe for the slaughter. Because of this, Kanehagakure had not only survived, but also came out on top in all 3 of the shinobi world wars. They became the greatest of the 5 great hidden villages, the mightiest, the most powerful of them all. This fact had brought them prestige and power in an era of constant tension, and in a way, peace. However, it is an established fact that even the strongest predator shall fall against a greater foe. Kanehagakure learned this lesson well on October 10th, as the sun waned, and the time turned to dusk, and before they even had the chance to defend themselves. The Kyubi no Yuko turned a third of their village into a pile of ash. Kanehagakure Merchant District 15 minutes after the Kyubi attacked. The young man with azure eyes and black hair groaned as he lifted a falling beam off of a child who wailed in pain. The falling beam had snapped the child's leg and would be unable to walk by themselves. The young man groaned as the beam began to cut into his hands. "Damn it, Hitomi, help me." Off to the side, barking orders to civilians who were trying to escape the burning district, a woman with a heart-shaped face and a generous figure turned her head towards the young man. Her long brown hair swished as she jumped off her perch and ran to him. She grabbed the child from underneath the beam and ran back towards the crowd, shoving the child in the hands of an older man, who swiftly took the child and started to run towards the bunkers with the rest of the crowd. The azure-eyed man dropped the beam and panted heavily as he looked at Hitomi. How many so far? Hitomi glanced at the azure-eyed man, about 57 Shigeko. The now-named Shigeko cursed underneath his breath, Kuzo, now what? Hitomi frowned and looked towards the burning merchant district, save as many as we can. Shigeko clenched his fists and smashed his foot against the ground, but nodded his head regardless. Hi, Taichu. The two turned to head into the district, Shinobi-san. Both turned their heads to see the man that had been handed the child before running towards them, the child still in his arms. Hitomi's eyes widened slightly. What happened? You were supposed to head to the bunk. The man interrupted her. We can't. A building collapsed in front of us. He began to choke up at his words. Shigeko stepped forward. What happened? He said with a bit of a shout. The man stammered out. It fell on top of the crowd. I don't know if anyone got past it. At this moment, Hitomi's eyes widened. No, she turned her head to where she had told the group to go. No. Aim. She ran to find the falling building, only for Shigeko to stop her. Let me go. My baby. Shigeko grunted as he tried to hold her. Hitomi, calm down. Hitomi snarled and turned and grabbed him. Don't you dare tell me to calm down, my daughter. Was at the very front of the group with your husband. He was probably past the building by the time it fell. You need to calm down now. Hitomi stopped thrashing as Shigeko finished. Shigeko sighed. Look, you're worried, I know, but despite Tsuchi being a damn ramen chef, he can take care of himself and aim. Right now, we need to save as many people as possible. We can do our job if you start freaking out, so you need to calm down. Aim will be fine, you got it. He spoke with a stern conviction. When Hitomi didn't reply, he grabbed her shoulder and said louder, do you got it? Hitomi nodded her head, but she was obviously upset. She sniffed and looked up. I got it. Shigeko nodded. Good. He then turned his head to the man holding the child, who was still whimpering. Did anyone else survive? The man nodded, but he was obviously straining himself doing so. Yes, about 6-7 others I think. Shigeko cursed again. Damn. He turned his head to Hitomi. Taichu, is there any other way to the bunker, besides the route they all went on? Hitomi snapped her head up and slowly nodded. Yes. She looked around. It's this way. She said, pointing down an alleyway. We can cut through the alleys and make it to the main road. The area should still be clear, but it will be a longer route. Shigeko nodded his head. Alright. He then turned his attention to the man with the child. You, get the others, and gather them here quickly. We will guide you to the road. Now go. The man nodded, and Shigeko took the child from his arms, as the man went back to get the others. The man ran back to the small number of people that had survived the falling building, and skidded to a halt in front of them. He took a glance over them, and counted 7 people total, 4 adults, a teenager, and 2 kids, a boy, and a girl. The little girl clung to an older man, who stumbled forward, even as the little girl clung to him. What happened to Isamu? The man, now known as Isamu, stammered. There's another way to the bunker we need to go to, now. The older man nodded, and bent down, picking up the little girl, who snuggled herself against him, leading the way of Isamu. Isamu nodded, and turned, and stepped forward. Roar. Only for the ground beneath their feet to tremble, as the Kyuubi unleashed a terrible roar, and a shockwave occurred from the sheer force of the roar. The already damaged buildings nearby began to creak, and several more began to topple over, one of which was falling towards him. Isamu's eyes widened, and he screamed, move. And he ran as fast as he could to get out of the building's path. The other civilians did the same, as the building came crashing down on the location. Isamu had fallen over, the force of the crash, sending him sprawling back even further than he intended. He slowly stood up, and turned to the survivors. Otusama. Isamu snapped his head around, and saw the little girl, covered in blood, tugging on her father's arm, crying, as she tried to pull him out from underneath the rubble. The little girl whimpered, as she grabbed her father's arm. As the building came down, the father could not move fast enough, so, as a last-ditch effort to save his daughter, he threw her, as far as he could. She skidded on the ground, cutting up her arms and legs, while her father was crushed by the falling house. Even now, he was coughing up blood, as he drew his last breaths of life. The little girl whimpered, Otusama, please, you have to get up. Her face was streaked with tears, as her bloody hands tried to pull her father out of the rubble. This was the sight that Isamu was treated to, as he slowly walked to the little girl. He lowered his head, and looked around. His head hung low. Nobody else had been able to escape the falling building, and now, it seemed that this little girl would be an orphan. The father coughed, and slowly raised his free hand, and brought it close to his daughter's face. Yoshiko-chan. The now-named Yoshiko sniffled, as she grasped her father's hand. Otusama. The father smiled softly, even as he coughed, blood dribbling down his cheek. My Yoshiko-chan, he gasped for air, as he slowly turned his head to Isamu, and nodded his head, beckoning Isamu closer. Isamu slowly walked forward, and got on his knees. The father stammered, trying to use what little life he had left to speak. Take my daughter, keep her safe. Isamu scrunched his lips, trying to keep his composure, and slowly nodded his head. I will. Yoshiko's father Kouhei smiled softly. Goody gingerly turned his head back to Yoshiko, who was sobbing almost uncontrollably, as she simply kneeled there. Yoshiko sniffled, and looked at her father. Hi Otu-sama, she said barely above a whisper. Kouhei slowly raised his hand, and moved his lips. I love. No more words escaped his lips, as his hand fell limp, and his head fell along with it, as the last breath of life left his broken body. Yoshiko whimpered. Otu-sama. No answer came to her, causing her to reach forward and grab his arm. Otu-sama woke up and began to shake his arm. Isamu lowered his head further as he stood. Yoshiko, Yoshiko didn't listen, and she shook Kouhei's arm harder. Otu-sama, please wake up, please. Her tears began to flow like a river as she bit her lip. Please. Isamu gingerly grabbed Yoshiko from underneath the arms, a solemn look on his face, as he pulled her away from Kouhei's body. Yoshiko whimpered more, as she held tightly onto her father's long sleeve. Otu-sama. Please wake up. She tightened her grip, causing his shirt to tear, as she was pulled from him. Isamu grit his teeth, as tears welled up in his eyes, and he pulled on Yoshiko again. The result was part of her father's sleeve tearing off, as Isamu carried her away from the scene. Yoshiko began to scream, and sob. No, Otu-sama. We can't leave, Otu-sama. She reached for him with her other hand, as she subconsciously tightened her grip on the sleeve. She could only watch, as she got further and further away from her father's body. She began to scream ever louder. Otu-sama. 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 With Hitomi and Shigeko. Hitomi was pacing back and forth as they waited for the group of civilians, and Shigeko was in a little better of a state. However, they both stopped what they were doing when they heard sobbing coming down the alleyways, and Isamu came towards them, carrying the still sobbing, and Yoshiko. Hitomi walked towards him. What happened? Where are the others? Isamu looked down. They didn't make it. Hitomi bit her lip and looked away as Shigeko cursed underneath his breath. Otu-sama. The two shinobi turned their heads towards the still sobbing Yoshiko, who was clinging onto her father's torn sleeve like a lifeline. Isamu sighed heavily and held her close. Shhh. It's alright, he swallowed, as he began to choke up. Your Otu-sama is in a better place, he sniffed, as he tried to comfort the girl. Shigeko lowered his head, before sighing, and standing up, the child with the broken legs still in his arms. Come on, we have to get to the bunkers now. Isamu nodded, and followed after Shigeko, Hitomi taking up the rear. They dived through the alleys, as more shockwaves struck the village, causing parts of the roofs to fall in their path, causing them to have to jump over the debris, or to find alternate routes. Finally, the group of two shinobi, one adult civilian, and two wounded children stormed out of the alleyways, and into the main road. Hitomi sighed in relief, as from the current spot they could see the bunkers from their position. Thankfully, thank Kami-sama, she looked at the others. Come on, we are almost there. She stepped forward, followed by the small group of survivors. Crash only for them to be blown back by a sheer force, cracking the ground around them, and causing many buildings to topple over. Somehow, none of them fell atop the small and battered group. Shigeko groaned as he sat up, the child in his arms whimpering in pain, as their leg was even more broken than before, not to mention their fractured ribs. Isamu and Yoshiko had fallen, and were separated. Yoshiko was able to barely stand, but she whimpered and cried. Hitomi had fallen the furthest away, being hit by the brunt of a shockwave. Shigeko groaned and looked up towards where the bunker was, only for his eyes to widen in horror as he saw a massive orange furred limb blocking his line of sight and blocking the main road. He was not the only one to notice this. Hitomi, Isamu, and Yoshiko all looked up, and their eyes bulged in terror as they looked upon the visage of the giant that was the Kyuubi no Yuko, his crimson-red slitted eyes boring into their very souls. The child in Shigeko's arms slowly opened their eyes and beheld the last thing it would ever see in their life. The gaping maw of the Kyuubi no Yuko as it bit into the earth around them. Cage Tower. In the Cage Tower, Minato Namikaze, the Yondaime Hokage of Konohagakure no Sato, the Kiroi Senko of Konoha, and hero of the Third Shinobi World War, was desperately searching through every last scroll he could find inside the cage vault. He had ripped through every last sealing scroll, he even went through Genjutsu and Taijutsu scrolls, hoping that he could find something that could combat the Kyuubi no Yuko. As he grabbed another pile of scrolls and dragged them to his desk, he looked out the window and saw the Kyuubi smash its jaws into the main road. He felt his heart tighten in his chest, as he hoped that whoever the Kyuubi's victims were, they died quickly, that they didn't suffer. But deep down inside, he knew it was too much to ask. Cursing, Minato read through each and every scroll. Thanks to his incredibly quick level of reading and his eidetic memory, he was able to skim through them and glean all the information he could get from each scroll. And in the time it took for Minato to read through the scroll, he felt his heart sink lower into his chest, as he found nothing. Not even the forbidden scroll of seals yielded anything that could help him in defeating the Kyuubi no Yuko. No seal, nothing in the entirety of the scroll, and he had looked at the damn thing twice. Minato's head turned sharply towards the floor as he heard the agonized screams of his wife as she was giving birth in the specialized hospital room used exclusively for the cage and their family. She had been in there since the Kyuubi attack started, her water having broken during the evacuation, and the hospital was one of the first things hit when the Kyuubi attacked. She had been swiftly escorted to the cage tower, where she was giving birth to twins. Minato grit his teeth as his fingers tightened into a fist, and he screamed. He grabbed the forbidden scroll, along with the nearby piles, throwing them off his desk, and swung his fist into the desk. Crack. Causing the desk to crack from the force of his punch, fracturing his hand in the process. Cursing, as he grasped his fractured hand, he looked towards the haphazardly thrown scrolls lying all over the place. And at the corner of his vision he saw something. When he threw the forbidden scroll, he threw it by the paper, which with the force he threw it with, should have torn it, but it didn't. Slowly moving from his desk, he looked down at the scroll, and he glanced at what he had caught in his peripheral vision. A seam on the edge of the scroll. He reached forward and grasped the scroll, rubbing his hand along the seam, causing the single sheet of paper to split in two. His eyes widening in shock, he opened the seam further, and to his astonishment, he found that the forbidden scroll of seals was even larger than imagined. Swiftly bringing the forbidden scroll to his desk, he opened the seam, revealing the other portion of the scroll. As he looked it over, he noticed how the scroll was designed. The seam was not difficult to open, however, it was placed in a manner that one could not accidentally brush their finger against it and find it, even if they had the forbidden scroll in their possession. The fact that Minato tossing the scroll aside revealed the hidden portion of the parchment was truly miraculous. Minato turned his attention to the scroll itself to see if there was anything in this portion which could help him, and his eyes widened as he stepped back from the scroll. There was a reason these were hidden. In the shinobi village system, are labeled in a series of ranks. E rank were the lowest ranks. These were techniques such as Bunshin or Kourimi. Following that were D rank techniques, while more dangerous than E ranks, were hardly a threat to seasoned shinobi, or even rookies, such as Megan. Narakumi no Jutsu, which were hardly dangerous on their own, but when used in conjunction with other techniques, or were ever so slightly altered, could turn the tide against lower ranked or inexperienced forces. Higher on the ladder were C ranks, such as Kaiten. Kakyu no Jutsu, deadly in the right hands, and debilitating in the wrong hands. Above them were B-rank techniques such as Megan. Jubakusatsu, and even higher than that were A-rank techniques such as the likes of Kakashi Haddock's Chidori, or Minato's own Rasengan technique. However, above all of those, were techniques that were deemed forbidden. These techniques were outlawed for various reasons, whether it was deemed an inhumane technique, or some other reason. These techniques, such as the Ito Tensei, were considered a mark of evil. But, as Minato looked into the hidden part of the forbidden scroll, it was clear to him that there were techniques even above S rank, and he was looking at a massive collection of them too. He felt bile rise in his throat as he read some of the techniques. In his mind, he knew that he should never have seen these techniques, but what choice did he have? Swallowing the bile in his throat, he looked through the scroll, trying to find something, anything that could help him turn the tide in his favor. After scanning through over half a dozen, each one more vile and cruel than the last, he could barely stand to look at the scroll anymore, and he almost gave up, but he pushed onward, and found a particular set of inscriptions within the forbidden scroll, which described a seal, a powerful seal, one of which had been designed for a single purpose: to defeat a Biju. At this realization, hope swelled in Minato's heart, and he grabbed the edges of the scroll, bringing it closer to his face, as he continued to read through instructions on how to perform the seal. Unri no Tamashi to Hanshitsu developed for the purpose of sealing a Biju, creating what is known as a pseudo-jinchuriki. This sealing technique requires chakra stores beyond A rank, as well as 2 newborn vessels from which to harbor the Biju. What this seal does is sever the Biju's soul from there, and seals the 2 parts into 2 vessels. The vessels can be no older than a week, as the of a Biju is too toxic for anyone older than that to survive. The same can be said for the Biju's soul. If the vessels are even a single second too old, then they will burn through their coils, causing a release of the Biju. As for the Biju's soul, the soul will not be able to commingle with the soul that has asserted its place within the body. The Biju's soul will be freed, sometimes killing the child, and will begin to wander, and in time restore its lost power. As Minato finished reading, he lowered his head, as sorrow and self-loathing overtook him, wondering if fate existed, and if it did, if it was being cruel to him. Minato was well versed in the concepts of pseudo-jinchuriki, where a child would be infused with the of a Biju, and due to that separation between the and the Biju's soul, the child would have absolute control over the theoretically. However, what bothered Minato, and drove him to despair, were the prerequisite of the seal. The vessels could be no older than a week old, and due to Konohagakure protocol, children, and their mothers, were in the hospital for a month to ensure the mother and infant were healthy, with some very few exceptions, and the hospital had been among the first things destroyed during the Kyuubi's rampage. He needed chakra stores that were above A rank, otherwise trying to use them would be meaningless, and Minato's chakra stores were simply A rank. Minato's eyes began to brim with tears as he realized that the only way to stop the Kyuubi would be to use his own newborn children and would more than likely kill him. But what other choice did he have? And so with a heavy heart, he left the office and headed down the stairs towards his wife's hospital room to deliver the news of what he had to do. Kushina was lying in the hospital bed, breathing heavily as she smiled softly down at the two bundles in her arm. After several agonizing hours of labor, she had given birth to twins, a boy and a girl. The medic nin watching over her couldn't help but smile. "Congratulations, Kushina-sama, you're a mother." Kushina paid the medic nin no mind as she snuggled her babies closer to her as they whimpered slightly in their sleep, trying to cuddle closer to their mother. Nearby, another medic nin was writing up some forms and turned their head to Kushina. "Kushina-sama, what will you name the children?" Kushina paid attention this time and looked down at each child. "My son will be named Naruto." She then turned her gaze to the little girl, "And my daughter will be named Natsumi." The medic nin smiled as they began to write out the birth certificates. Beautiful names. Kushina smiled, agreeing with the medic nin as she looked down at both her children. In her arm, Natsumi began to whimper as she extended her arm out, reaching towards Naruto. Kushina smiled softly. "Oh, does Natsumi want to be with her Nikki?" She adjusted her hold on the children, so they were both lying together, while still being held in her arms. Natsumi responded to this by snuggling up to Naruto, who gently held Natsumi with his little arms. The medic nin nearby cooed at the sight and took several pictures. This was the scene Minato came upon as he entered the private hospital room, and it made his heart break even further. Kushina looked up and smiled as she saw Minato. "Minamoto-kan, look," she said, gently indicating to the babies, who were still snuggled against one another. Minato bit his lip and forced a smile. "They're beautiful, Kushina." Kushina noticed the stammer in Minato's voice. "What is Minato?" Minato gulped slightly and looked at the two medic nin in the room. "Leave us." The two looked at the yondaime in confusion. "But, yondaime-sama, we... leave us?" The two medic nin jumped back at the sudden shout that came from their leader. After a single second of composure, they both exited the room, leaving Minato and Kushina alone with the babies. Kushina frowned. "Minato, what's going on?" Her husband was not one to lose his temper easily. In fact, he was not one to shout, so his sudden behavior was concerning to her. Minato lowered his head. "The Kyuubi." Kushina's eyes whitened slightly. Due to the pain of giving birth, she had completely forgotten about the Kyuubi. What happened? She moved slightly, wincing in pain, her body still incredibly sore from giving birth. Minato slowly walked forward, and I found a way to stop it. Kushina's eyes lit up, and a grin crossed her features. "That's wonderful news." Minato lowered his head again, a single tear escaping his eye. Kushina's grin turned into a frown. "Minato." Minato sniffled. "To stop Kyuubi, I had to seal it into living vessels." He slowly raised his head. Two young living vessels began to choke on his words. Kushina stared at him. "Minato, what are you?" Her eyes whitened in realization at what Minato was saying, and looked down at her babies, still nestled in her arms. No. Absolutely not." She brought her babies even closer to her, shielding them with her arms. "I won't let you turn our babies into Jinchuriki. I won't." Minato choked. "Kushina, listen, No, Yalston. I will not, ever, under any circumstances, allow my babies to be used to hold a demon. Do you understand me?" "Damn it, Kushina, what choice do we have?" he shouted, tears streaming down his face. "I couldn't find any other way." He brought up his hands and held out several fingers. "No ninjutsu, no jinjutsu, no taijutsu, no spell even, that could stop the Bijuru. Damn it, Kushina. Do you think I want this?" Kushina didn't speak. Instead, she definitely held her children close to her. Minato looked down and sighed heavily. "Kushina, if I don't do this, our children will not see the sunrise. We can't evacuate, otherwise I would have done that already. Kushina Haim, I am out of options." Kushina looked down at her babies, who had fallen asleep, even with her, and Minato's shouting. She gently moved her hand and gingerly caressed their heads, and a heavy sigh escaped her lips. "Okay," she stammered out, as tears began to brim and flowed down her cheeks. Minato looked up. "Kushina." Kushina sighed heavily and looked at Minato. "Okay," and slowly held out the children for Minato to take. Minato sighed heavily and walked forward and reached for the two newborns, only to freeze in place, as he was struck with an intense and precise killing intent from Kushina herself. Kushina's eyes were narrowed, and she spoke with venom. "They come back alive, unharmed and unblemished," her tear asked Minato. Minato slowly nodded his head as the culling intent was released. With a slow motion, he took Naruto and Natsumi from Kushina and slowly turned around, hiding the look of sorrow on his face as he left the room. He didn't have the courage to tell her that the seal he was about to use would more than likely kill him. "Konoha." The Kyuubi no Yuko roared as its paws slashed through the earth, attacking anything and everything with ruthless intent, as it turned the once bustling merchant district into a mountain of dust and ash. The Kyuubi turned its head upwards and roared to the sky, and for the briefest of moments, the Kyuubi's slitted eye was overtaken by a shimmer of 3 tomo. At the same time, Minato Namikaze, Yondaime Hokage of Konohagakure no Sado, and father to twins, leapt over the burning buildings, holding his children tightly against his chest, his path leading towards the Kyuubi no Yuko. The Kyuubi slashed at the nearby buildings, and smashed its tails into the landscape, either not noticing, or not caring for incoming Minato's presence. Minato skidded to a halt on the mountains of rubble, and slowly put down his children on a cool surface. Minato took in a deep breath, and shot through several hand seals, Kuchius no Jutsu, and slammed his hand into the ground beneath him, and in a massive cloud of smoke, both Minato and his children shot into the sky, the cloud of smoke clearing away suddenly, revealing a massive toad, smoking a pipe, and wielding a massive sword upon his back. The toad grunted, and turned its eye upward. Minato, why have you summoned me? Roar. The toad stopped its sentence, and blinked. Never mind. Minato gasped, and panted, Gamabunta-sama, I need you to attack Kyuubi, keep it in place long enough for me to do what needs to be done. Gamabunta snorted, and looked at Minato, fine, but after this is over, we need to have a little talk about what you can summon me for, and what you can summon me for. He then reached for his blade, pulling it out with speed that shouldn't have been possible for one his size, and shot at the Kyuubi, Minato, and the children still safely upon his head. Minato grit his teeth, as he began to perform the necessary hand signs with one hand, while he kneeled down to where his children were, and using a brush, ink began to draw the seals upon their abdomen. Meanwhile, Gamabunta slashed at Kyuubi, who simply blocked the immense blade from harming it, and slashed at the toad summon. Gamabunta jumped back, and then shot forward again, slashing viciously, while he shot out globs of water at the great beast. The water struck the Bijuu, but did little more than steam against its body. Minato painted, as he finished with the seals, as well as all but the last hand sign of the technique. He slowly stood upright, and then reached into his pouch, grabbing a handful of chakra replenishing pills. In a single motion, he tossed a handful of pills into his mouth, and bit down, swiftly swallowing them, and screamed in pain, as the pills instantly took effect, flooding his chakra coils with more chakra than he had ever had in them before. Gamabunta had pushed Kyuubi back, and had him pinned against the broken wall of Konoha, and screamed, Minato, do it now. Minato grunted in pain, and looked down at his children, a single tear falling from each eye. Forgive me, and perform the final hand seal, Bunri no Tamashi to Hanshitsu. In that single instant, the children lit up with a burning blue light, as Minato shot his hands forward, his own chakra blazing out of him like a raging inferno, as he reached for the Kyuubi. Immense arms of chakra shot into the Bijuu, tearing through it entirely. The beast swung its head back, as it roared in agony. Minato grit his teeth, as he felt his chakra stores being drained by the second, and began to pull on the Bijuu itself. The beast roared in pain, as its form began to shift, and dissipate. With a cry of agony, Minato gave one last pull. In that instant, the Kyuubi's body shattered into two parts, each one condensed into two spheres in a matter of seconds, held by the chakra arms extending from Minato. Minato coughed and wheezed, as he continued pulling the two spheres back with him, and shoving them into the seals he had placed on both his children. The seals glowed, as the Yaoki and soul were sealed away within his children. Minato gasped, as he fell over onto Gamabunta's head, his vision becoming cloudy, as he felt the strain on his coils, and the emptiness in them. And, as his vision failed him, as his eyes closed shut, he could see a spectral shape, reaching towards him. Time skip. 2 days had passed since the Kyuubi's defeat, and already, the village had begun to rebuild. Shinobi and civilians alike were working together to rebuild the broken merchant district. From there, the shinobi would use there to try and cleanse the scorched soil around Konoha, in the hopes of allowing crops to grow inside the village walls again. As it was, they had to open up the dry storage vaults. Meanwhile, medic nin and doctors alike had converted old warehouses that had not seen use since the war into a makeshift hospital, while the new hospital was being built, this time, much further from the walls. However, even with the rebuilding effort, the scars left by the Kyuubi attack could not be forgotten, for the dead were beyond the count of grief. The daughter was crying by her father, as they stood over an empty coffin, because the mother's body could not be found. The husband kneeling over his wife's grave, his tears staining the coffin which contained her broken body. The sister who had thrown herself onto her brother's coffin, who had been so mangled by the Kyuubi's fierceness, that the only way they had known it was him was by the bracelet scorched into his arm. Stories such as these were told all across Konoha, as the dead were buried, cremated, and their ashes scattered to the winds. However, without a leader, the current number of dead would only rise, as the Kyuubi attack had not been a silent event, and news of it had spread like wildfire, from the closest towns of Hai no Kuni, all the way to the cage office of the Tsuchikage himself. And without a leader to guide them, Konoha didn't stand a chance. And so, because of this, the former Sandaime Hokage, Hiruzen Tsurutobi, retook the mantle, as Hokage of Konohagakure no Sado. At the moment, Sandaime was sitting at the Hokage desk, as he examined the papers before him, the reports delivered by Hai no Kuni's border patrol, and the recommendations given to him by his old rival, Danzo Shimura. With a heavy sigh, Hiruzen grabbed a short rod with an insignia on the end, which had been sitting in an open flame, and pressed it against the form in front of him, a single thought going through his head. I am too old for this shit. As he approved the assassination of the daimyo of Tsuchi no Kuni. Time skip. In the Cage Tower hospital room, a medic nin was looking over a series of charts, and looking towards the prone form of Minato Namikaze. After sealing the soul of the Kyuubi within his children, he had fallen unconscious. The sheer amount of chakra the technique required drained his chakra reserves, down to the very last drop. By all accounts, he should have died. It was only due to the timely arrival of Medic Nin, and the fact that chakra replenishing pills had forced his chakra network to produce more chakra, that he was still alive. However, it was not easy to save his life. The Medic Nin had forced chakra transplants, where through a complex, and potentially life-threatening seal matrix, they converted their own chakra to match Minato's chakra, which allowed his chakra circulatory system to keep his heart, lungs, liver, kidneys, and brain functional. The Medic Nin stood by him, as he lay in the center of the seal matrix, for 2 days straight. Once his body had stabilized, and his chakra circulatory system began to produce enough chakra to keep his internal systems functional, they breathed a sigh of relief. The Holocene, however, the trauma that his body had suffered had placed him into a comatose state, and despite the efforts of the present Medic Nin, they were unable to wake him from the coma. Not even Tsunade Senju herself, who had returned to the village upon hearing about the Kyuubi attack, was able to wake him from his coma. And so, since that day, Minato had been trapped in the Cage Tower's hospital room, hooked up to a machine that read his heart rate, brainwave activity, pulse, and so on, while he was fed his necessary nutrients intravenously, while a tube had been inserted so his bladder could be evacuated. The Medic Nin looked down at the yondaime, and shook their head, seeing no discernible change thus far, even after a month. Jotting down the readings from the machine, the medic then walked up to Yondaime's bed, and gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "Wake up soon, Yondaime-sama, we need you." This particular Medic Nin had done this many a day, many an hour, and many a minute, hoping praying that their yondaime would awaken from his coma. And just like every other time they did this, they received no answer in return. Lightly clenching their fingers, and closing their eyes, they turned away from the yondaime's bed, and moved to return to the medical camp constructed just outside the Cage Tower, in order to perform their duties for the remaining wounded. Beep. Only to stop suddenly, and turn around, as they heard a loud beep heading from the brainwave scanner. Beep beep beep. The Medic Nin's eyes widened, and they ran over to yondaime's bedside, looking him over. A marginal tick here, a slightly scrunching of the eyelids, a heavier gasp escaping the yondaime's lips. All these were marginal, but this Medic Nin had been trained under the tutelage of none other than Tsunade Senju for many a year, and they had seen these signs in many other cases of comatose patients, and knowing that, the Medic Nin came to a single conclusion. Yondaime was waking up. A smile spread across their features, and they backpedaled to the door of the room, and opened it, screaming into the hallway, "He's waking up. Yondaime-sama is waking up." The Medic Nin turned their head back to the yondaime, and their eyes widened, as a frown began to form. The minor twitches were slowing down, they were stopping, and he was going back into his coma. The Medic Nin ran back to the yondaime's bedside, and cursed, "No, no, no, don't you go back, Yondaime-sama, don't you go back." They charged healing chakra into their hands, and placed it over the yondaime's forehead, and over their left temple. The yondaime's minor twitches came back, he was still. The Medic Nin painted, as they felt their chakra being drained rather quickly from the strain, their black hair falling into her black eyes. "Damn it, Minato, wake up." The Medic Nin shouted, as she began to pour more of the healing chakra into Minato. The door to the medical room slammed open, a woman with a sizable bust, blonde hair, and a purple diamond on her forehead standing in the frame, along with none other than Hiruzen Sarutobi, and 2 of the Medic Nin. The Medic Nin either did not notice, or simply did not care, focusing all of their effort on waking the yondaime up. "Wake up." Electric blue eyes snapped open, and a gasp of air escaped the lips of the yondaime, as he shot upwards, panting heavily. The force of him shooting up sent the Medic Nin stumbling backwards, being caught by the blonde-haired woman, who looked at them with concern. "Shizune." The now-named Shizune looked up, heavy breathing escaping her lips. "Tsunade-sama." Tsunade looked over at her with concern. "Shizune, are you alright?" Shizune only nodded, and smiled. "Yeah. Just really tired." She began to slump, as the drain on her chakra caught up with her. Tsunade held her up. Whoa, they're okay, you have worked long enough." Tsunade then grunted, as she lifted Shizune up bridal style. "You are going to the camp to sleep." Tsunade began to walk out of the hospital room, but not before she smiled, as she glanced between Minato and Shizune for a moment. As they left, Hiruzen Sarutobi slowly walked up to the panting yondaime, who began to look at his surroundings. Hiruzen stood next to his bed, and coughed. "Minato." Minato suddenly snapped his gaze to Hiruzen, and his eyes widened in shock. For a few minutes, not a single word was said between the two, until Minato pointed at Hiruzen accusingly. "Alright, what the hell did you do to get sent to hell?" Hiruzen just stared at Minato, an indignant look hardened on his face. "What?" Minato pointed to his surroundings. "I am in a hospital. I hate hospitals. I died, so where else could I be besides hell? Hiruzen twitched. Minato, you didn't die. Minato rolled his eyes. Oh sure, I am sure somehow somebody got to me just before I dropped completely dead, and managed to save my life. Hiruzen stared at him with a blank look. Yes, actually, they did. Minato frowned. Prove it. Smack. Minato fell completely off of the bed, as a slap came from nowhere, sending him toppling over with enough force to send him crashing into the wall, as well. Before Minato could even groan in pain, he was lifted off the ground with an incredibly strong tug, and punched straight in the nose with enough force to break it, as well as bend some of his teeth a bit backwards. Minato's head slammed back, and he finally let out a pain-filled moan, and he slowly opened his eyes. Then he saw Kushina staring at him, her eyes burning angrily, as she began to shake him. What did I tell you, Minato? What the hell did I fucking tell you when you went to go stop the Kyuubi? Minato began to get shook around, to the point he felt his neck crack from the force of the shaking. Kushina began to scream louder, and release killing intent, and chakra, which began to chip away at the floor she was standing on. I told you that they were to return to me alive, unharmed, and unblemished. At those words, Minato's eyes whitened. Kushina-sama. Kushina stopped throttling Minato, and snapped her head to look at who had spoken, to see a nurse with her hands on her hips, frowning at Kushina. Kushina-sama, it may have been a month, but you shouldn't strain yourself so much. You are still recovering. Kushina frowned, and shoved Minato against the wall, and turned around in a huff. Fine. At this point, Minato began to slowly push himself up, grunting in pain, as he looked up at Kushina, then at Hiruzen. Okay, I believe you. Hiruzen smiled. Good, now, since you are awake, take it. He said, whilst throwing the cage hat at him. Don't ever put me in a position where I have to wear that accursed thing ever again. He said with a slight growl, before he left the room, and bounded down the halls. Kushina meanwhile looked at Minato, and grabbed him by the shoulder. Come on, Minato. Minato yelled from her, suddenly pulling him up, and dragging him out the door. Where are we going? Kushina didn't look at him, as she spoke. You'll see. After she dragged him further down the hall, she opened the door, shoved Minato inside, and crossed her arms. Okay, now Minato, look at our children, and tell me why I am upset with you. Minato looked at Kushina, then slowly turned around, his eyes whitening slightly. Inside the room was a queen-size bed, and a crib next to the wall, a door leading to what he assumed was a bathroom, and two other doors leading to two smaller rooms, as well as a nearby closet. Minato focused all of his attention on the crib, and he slowly began to walk towards it. He looked into the crib, and gasped, as he saw what was in the crib. A little boy, no older than a month, with blonde hair, which specked up ever so slightly, his unblemished skin shining in the light of the room, and lying next to him was a little girl, the same age, with a mixture of blonde and red hair, but, as he looked at the girl, he saw what had to be the reason Kushina was upset with him. On each cheek were 3 whisker marks, which he could tell had not been drawn there, as they looked to be a part of her very skin. With a slight gulp, he turned to Kushina. The whisker marks on our daughter. Kushina nodded. Yep. Minato sighed, and looked down at the 2 children, and then turned back to Kushina, and braced himself. I accept whatever punishment you choose to give me, Kushina-heim. Minato stayed like that, while Kushina simply walked to the crib, and gingerly picked up the little girl. The broken nose was your punishment, Minato. Minato's eyes snapped open, and he slowly turned his head, looking at Kushina. Really? Kushina smiled, and held the girl close to her chest. Yes, she snapped her gaze at him, but only because I found them cute. Got that, Minato? Minato jumped back, and nodded his head rapidly. Kushina then smirked, before looking back at her daughter. Good. Minato stayed in the position he was in, as he stared at Kushina, holding their daughter. So what is her name? Kushina smiled, and looked at Minato. Her name is Natsumi. Minato blinked, and smiled, as he walked over to Kushina, looking over her shoulder. Natsumi, it's a beautiful name, dear. Kushina giggled, and looked at Natsumi, who began to yawn, causing both Kushina and Minato to coo, and tickle the yawning little girl. As the 2 focused all their attention on the yawning girl with the whisker marks, neither noticed the small blonde, as he clenched his fingers tightly on the edges of his blankets, a whimper escaping his 1-month-old lips. Thanks for watching my video, and make sure to check out the author of this fanfic. Link is in the description. See you next time. Till then, sayonara.